snitches get rocket launchers. Gather round to watch the man speak and see that time doesn't really move at all. Welcome to Channel 8.5.
Hello and welcome back to Channel 8.5, a podcast about film, television, and pop culture. My name is Andrew Hanna.
I am Joe Galena.
Joe, how are you doing this week?
Andrew, Chicago is in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yeah, you guys are getting pummeled.
Yes, getting pummeled. But it's okay, because today I'm inside, I'm warm, and I'm ready to talk about Judas and the Black Messiah. The story of Fred Hampton, the very young chairman of the Chicago branch of the Black Panthers, and his relationship with his head of security, Bill O'Neill. And it's in the title, so there's not a lot of spoiling how it ends, but it's really the journey that's important with this movie. But how their relationship, again, ended, the rise of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, and Bill's, it's not a spoiler because it happens in the first 5 minutes, his working with the FBI to inform on Fred.
To infiltrate the Black Panther movement.
Correct. So let's get into it, shall we? What did you think of Judas and the Black Messiah?
I loved it. I thought this was probably one of my favorite films of 2020. Technically, it came out in 2021, but it was supposed to come out in 2020. So
it was supposed to come out in 2020.
Yeah.
I think that it still qualifies for Oscars at this point. I don't remember what the cutoff is for Oscars, for 2020 Oscars, because they were allowing movies to come out in 2021 for a few months to still be eligible for 2020 Oscar consideration. I actually don't know if this is going to be up for anything, but it should be. I completely agree. And not to bury the lead, but I also loved it a lot.
Yeah. No, it was very well directed. I think the director, Shaka King, did such a phenomenal job in all aspects, because it's just exciting to see that this is now at the forefront of the cultural lexicon, and we're subsequently privy to just the formation and the evolution of Black cinema. Like, I feel like we're starting to see the cinematic language be developed before our eyes, because what I noticed in this film, and what we've seen a lot lately, is the inclusion of Black poetry as voiceover in scenes depicting the events or life at that time. We saw it in Ma Rainey, we saw it in Lovecraft Country, even in First Man. If you remember, there was a scene with a group of civil rights activists outside of the Kennedy Space Center, and they laid Whitey on the Moon over top the montage.
Oh yeah.
So we're beginning to see this through line of expression and the marrying of Black voices from different mediums with cinema to help amplify the voices that were muffled in the past.
It really is a credit to Ryan Coogler, I think, also, because the backstory to this, if you want to know, is Ryan Coogler met Shaka King at the 2013 Sundance Film Festival, I believe, when he was there with Fruitvale Station. And Shaka King was there with his only feature, which is called Hollyweeds, which did not do very well, and it didn't sell.
Well, he came from the world of comedy, right?
Yes, Shaka King definitely is in the world of comedy. He did High Maintenance, which is the HBO show. But his first movie was at that same festival where Ryan Coogler was, the darling of the festival with Fruitvale Station.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest with you, is not a movie that I particularly like that much. But they formed a relationship. Ryan Coogler produced Judas and the Black Messiah. Without his hand in there, I don't know if this movie could ever get made, because really, this Judas and the Black Messiah is I read a thing that said they wanted to Trojan horse a biopic of Fred Hampton into a movie that is really the story of two people. Again, like I said
the same thing,
before, Bill O'Neill and Fred and their relationship, and Bill snitching on the Black Panthers. And in that aspect, could you get a biopic of Fred Hampton without that Trojan horse? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but this is the way that they did it.
I think you can, given the current circumstances, but I think it was smart the way that they went about it.
I agree.
Because they used a perspective that I would say was widely taught in schools, which was Bill O'Neill's view, essentially, whether he lied to himself to justify his actions or not, but that Martin Luther King was the peaceful activist and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers were the violent extremists. And by presenting that view through our main character, you can more easily start to pick it apart. So I think it was necessary for the starting point of the story to present the premise that has been widely propagated and guide us through some of the fallacies attributed to the Black Panthers. Even I was surprised with how little I knew about the Black Panthers and what they stood for and accomplished, because Our civil rights lessons primarily centered around Martin Luther King, and when it came to the Black Panthers, they sometimes completely wrote them off as violent extremists. And I love the scene where Hampton explains the correlation and differences between politics and war. But I didn't know about the programs they implemented, like the free medical clinic they were trying to build, like feeding not only Black children, but any child that was food insecure. Like there's the scene when they go to see the Young Patriots, the group of working class white people in Chicago.
Which is odd because I grew up in Chicago. I didn't know many of those people. That was a shock to me. I was like, "This is an odd thing to
Yeah.
see." I was unaware personally that there was a Southern coalition in Chicago, having grown up here myself. Didn't know. Don't see many Confederate flags, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Like when they got into the argument about the Confederate flag and they keep going back and forth, and then one of the Panthers basically says, "You may not have owned the plantation, but you oversaw the plantation." And then Hampton simply says, "If the slaves banded with the overseers to slit the master's throat, we wouldn't be in this shithole in the first place."
Mhm.
And that's what made Hampton so effective, is his desire to include anyone, regardless of race, who's been screwed by the system. And that is a context that was left out when they taught us about the Black Panthers.
That scene was great when he walks into that meeting.
Oh, yeah, it's one of my favorite scenes because I think it highlighted the fact that it wasn't only about racial struggle, but it was also about class struggle.
The very opening of this movie too is at Malcolm X College. And it's funny because my grandmother worked at Malcolm X College during the time of this movie.
Oh, interesting.
But I asked my mom, I was like, so she would have known, like she would have known this movement. She would have been in there. And she goes, yeah, yeah, she would have.
Yeah, because you grew up on the South Side.
My family's from the Southwest side.
Speaking of Malcolm X College, though, that's the scene where we first meet Dominique Fishback's character, Deborah Johnson, who was Hampton's partner. And Deborah Johnson and her son, Fred Hampton Jr., are still involved in the Panthers, but they helped write this and get it made. But despite the pressure that I'm sure that Dominique was under in portraying her, she did a phenomenal job.
But she doesn't get she's not on screen a long time.
She wasn't, but I think she was there for a lot of the major plot points, and she is one of the sources of conflict because she was pregnant with Hampton's son.
And you know what? I'm glad that you brought up her character because this is the part of the movie that potentially made it sag a little bit in the middle and might have made it feel a little bit disjointed to me if I'm going to have some criticisms of it. Because this movie is ultimately about William O'Neill, Lakeith Stanfield's character. He is the main character. And actually, I looked it up as you were talking. Daniel Kaluuya was submitted to the
Mhm.
Oscars for 2020 as a supporting character, which I completely agree with because he is not the
Yeah,
lead. Lakeith
yeah.
Stanfield is the lead.
No, he isn't there for half the film.
Yeah, exactly. And this relationship, it's really I'm going to compare it to Donnie Brasco, which is a movie that I've talked about on this show a lot,
Mhm.
of a guy who's in too deep that begins to identify with the people that he is supposed to be informing on. And so it kind of shifted away from a biopic, quote unquote, of Fred Hampton and is really the story of Bill O'Neill. But you get all these ancillary things. Ancillary might be the wrong word, but the backstory, the family life of Fred
Yeah.
Hampton. And so it kind of feels disjointed in that way of what does this movie want to be? Because it started off as an undercover cop story. Again, I'm using air quotes, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the structure. And then shifted away from that when it went to the Fred Hampton story.
But I think those scenes were important because it adds weight to the betrayal, which isn't a spoiler. You know what's going to happen from the beginning. But Bill O'Neill lived with these people, he knew them intimately, and he still led Hampton to his slaughter. And Lakeith did such an amazing job.
Oh, he's so good. I loved him in this more than Daniel Kaluuya. Daniel Kaluuya gets the big moments. He gets the big speeches. He's very good at them. And he's also British. And if you watch Skins, his first role from 12 years ago, you're like, that's the guy who's going to be a huge star? It's hilarious. And he nailed the Chicago accent
He was so good. And not only did he nail Hampton's intonation and his rhythm of
and
speech,
presence.
but also just the way he could express so much with the way that he looked at someone or something,
Mhm.
which makes it even more believable that he is able to make allies with just about anyone that he meets, with the Puerto Ricans or the Young Patriots, a white group, and when O'Neill begins to buy into the movement as well.
Oh, you absolutely understand why he is seduced by this guy. 100%. And it makes more sense when you realize the real life people were 20 and 17.
They were young, yeah.
You
Mhm.
know, Fred Hampton died at 21 and Bill was 17, and that is again another thing that I kind of knock against this movie, and you can't have the same movie with actors who are the real age because you couldn't get Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield. Would you buy it as much if there was the actual ages of the real life people in the movie? I don't know. That movie doesn't exist. I can't answer that question.
Yeah, but I feel like young people looked so much older back then, and they also had to mature a lot quicker. Like, if you've ever driven past your old high school and you look at the kids, you're like, "Wait, those are high school kids?
They look so small.
They look so tiny."
We've just gotten fatter, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. Like the frozen pizzas that we're eating that is stunting our growth, but people do look much younger, and
No, I will say though, I it did bother me in the very first scene of this movie, which is wonderful. It's a great
oh,
scene.
it's such a good scene, yeah.
It's so good. But when Lakeith Stanfield walks into this bar and he's a carjacker, he's trying to boost cars, and he walks into the bar with a fedora on and a top coat, and he's a very Humphrey Bogart looking, and he flashes a fake FBI badge to some dudes in a bar, and he goes, "I'm repossessing the car. It's been stolen. Your car's been reported stolen, and I'm taking it."
Yeah.
And he's got his hat pulled down so nobody sees his face. And he's trying to pull this con, and he gets into a fight, and his hat gets knocked off, and then everybody goes, "Wait a minute, you're just a kid. You can't be an FBI agent." But I'm like, but that's just Lakeith Stanfield. That's an adult man. I saw him in Sorry to Bother You. He worked in a call center.
But I think for the context of the times, in order for a black man to be in the FBI, you probably had to be there for quite a while. Like you
Maybe.
weren't just gonna make it at a young age. So maybe that. I mean, that's
Maybe you
that's
got to
the way
look.
that I took it. Like you're gonna have to put in a lot more time to get to that point, and so that's probably what surprised them. He's too young to be a black man in a position of power.
He's not Lil Ray Howard at the end.
Exactly.
I came away from Lakeith Stanfield from this movie more than Daniel Kaluuya. I thought he won
Oh
the
yeah,
movie.
I completely agree. It almost seemed like it hurt him as an actor even to portray such a I wouldn't even say O'Neill's a terrible person because he was being extorted by the
It's a
FBI.
tough situation.
And I think the scene with Agent Mitchell where he brings him into his home and he offers him a cigar and the good whiskey and then tells him he's going to make it worth his while. I mean, all those things are the things that are dangled in front of our faces to distract from the larger issues at hand. And Agent Mitchell, played by Jesse Plemons,
Who's so good.
he gives him a choice between going to jail or lifting himself out of poverty, which is kind of a shitty position to be in.
You bring up a good point. How did you feel about the scenes with Jesse Plemons and Martin Sheen as J. Edgar Hoover, who, by the way, in this movie looks like a boiled potato? It's very distracting.
Yeah.
And if you're going to, again, the criticisms that I have of this movie are very slight. I really
Yeah.
liked it. But why would you put Martin Sheen in that weird makeup to make him look like just a monstrosity? He looks awful. And that's President Bartlett. I think it would have been more because I associate Martin Sheen with the West Wing. When I think of that,
Yeah.
that's who I think of.
No,
I think it would have
figured,
been
yeah.
more impactful to just have Martin Sheen be up there because that's President Bartlett. When I see J. Edgar Hoover in this, I just think, ugh, what is that? He looks like a kicked in testicle.
I think it's because he was the boogeyman. I think the fact that he was so ugly made him even more unnerving, and his presence in a room kind of sucked all the warmth and the air out of it. Like that moment where he sits down Mitchell and he's asking about his daughter and all that stuff. Up until that point, like I'm thinking Mitchell's just ignorant. He's probably a good guy. He's just ignorant. Like when he says you can't cheat your way to equality, it's like, well, your people were cheating their way when they used humans as slaves. There's a certain ignorance in the way that he's viewing things that is very centrist.
I viewed Mitchell's character as very working man. Like he was just a guy who's walking his beat. You know, he's like, all right, he's assigned to get the Black Panthers. So that's what he did. I actually don't view him as any sort of a racist at all, to be honest. He's just, I don't think he was. And I think that scene that you're talking about with J. Edgar Hoover asking him if his, what would he do if his daughter brought home a black man, and he hesitates and he doesn't answer. He's like, well, who cares about why are we talking about this anyway? I think that's what shows his real views. Whereas when he's talking to Bill, he is seducing him and he's playing a part.
Yeah.
And so that's why I kind of view him more as just like a working class guy. Like whoever he has to go after, he does what he's told.
Yeah. But again, it's complicity. Like he's complicit.
True. That's I
think what this film did well was depict the complexity of race in America very well and with nuance.
It was extremely nuanced. And the point of a lot of those scenes, you know, between Fred and Dominique Fishback's character, between Jesse Plemons and Martin Sheen, is to provide that nuance. And did all of it work? No, I don't think. Most of it did. The great majority of it did.
What didn't work for you out of curiosity?
The FBI stuff between Jesse Plemons and and Martin Sheen. I don't think that really
Mhm.
worked. I think you could have cut that out. And when I think about it, because I've been thinking about this, I wanted the movie to focus more between Bill and Fred. I thought that was the central relationship, but making the story primarily about Will, if it was only from his perspective, you didn't get anything else.
Yeah.
It would take away from the impact of the ending of Fred getting killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
No,
if
I
you
agree
didn't
with that.
have Dominique Fishback's involvement, then it wouldn't hit as hard. And so that's why I think I'm kind of conflicted as to it was needed and it was necessary, but I also think that that did make it sag a little bit in
I
the middle.
don't think it sagged for me necessarily because I'm trying to think of what you could have cut for time, but I can't think of anything.
I feel like if they took out probably about 10 minutes, it was just a little bit tighter, then it would have moved a little bit better.
I will say though, directing wise, I think Shaka King directed the shit out of this. When I talk about utilizing everything at your disposal to tell your story, this is what I mean. From cinematography and sound to lighting and color. Like, I love the orange and green motifs throughout the entire film. Like, the moment when O'Neill comes home to his apartment and it's fractured by the green light and the orange, and then he sits next to the orange window.
Oh
And
yeah.
it seems like the green represents the revolution, and then orange would, I guess, represent apathy or centrism.
Oh, even the costumes too. The costumes, everything. This should get some sort of a nomination for costume design because it
Oh,
looks
and
great.
they all look so cool.
They all look so good. Everyone's got cool sunglasses on.
But he even carried the color schemes into the costume design. Like, Dominique Fishback's character wears orange throughout the entire film until she accepts that the father of her child, Hampton, was likely going to be murdered, at which point she begins to wear black.
They nailed the aesthetic of Chicago too. When he was
Yeah.
sitting in his room with those windows, when he goes to the woman who they're sitting in the kitchen
Yeah. Oh,
and
the
no,
mother.
the mother. And let me tell you, that kitchen looks exactly like a
Mhm.
kitchen in a Chicago bungalow because
Yeah.
my great grandmother, I remember sitting in her kitchen and it was the exact same setup, that tiny table against the wall and then a refrigerator and then the stove. It all looked exactly like that, except my great grandmother's kitchen was yellow,
Yeah.
but everything about it, like they nailed it all.
I love that scene so much too.
It was a tough scene to watch, but I was kind of
Mhm.
distracted. I was like, my God,
This
look
looks
at how
exactly like
this kitchen
my
looks real
grandma's
good.
kitchen.
It
Yeah.
did. It did. I couldn't get over it.
No, I think overall this was phenomenal. Definitely worth watching. It's on HBO Max. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Oh, 100%.
That does it for us, though. And if you had a chance to watch Judas and the Black Messiah, let us know what you thought. Did you agree or disagree with anything we discussed? There will not be an episode next week, but we'll be back on March 4th. However, if you are craving some movie reviews during our short hiatus, check out Joe's Instagram at j.e.galena. If you enjoyed the review and would like to join us in the future, please consider subscribing and dropping a like. If you have any ideas for a theme you'd like us to discuss, or a film, TV show, anything pop culture, let us know on YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find all those links on channel8.5.com. That's channel8.5, completely spelled out.com.
We have new episodes every Thursday. Until next time, my name is Joe Galena.
And I'm Andrew Hanna, and this is Channel 8.5.